The air in Wilmington, North Carolina, was cool as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow on the familiar streets of Michael Jordan's youth. His car glided down Cedar Street, past the corner store where he used to buy penny candy, and toward the basketball court where he had spent countless hours honing his skills. Even after all the fame, the championship titles, and the millions that followed, this neighborhood, the heart of his childhood, still felt like home. Michael had been back in town for business, but something about the night felt different, like a quiet pull toward something unfinished. Nostalgia lingered in the air, but as he neared Joey's Pizza, a sudden movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was just another passerby, but as he slowed down, his gaze sharpened. There, crouched behind the dumpster, was a figure with ragged clothes, shifting in a way that was oddly familiar. The posture, the mannerism, it was unmistakable. It was a move Michael had seen countless times on the basketball court, the familiar fluidity of a childhood friend. Michael's heart skipped a beat. No, it couldn't be. He leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat as he watched the figure, a man with a huddled frame and a dirty baseball cap, digging through the garbage. David? The name escaped his lips, barely above a whisper, as if saying it aloud might make the impossible real. The man's head snapped up. Their eyes met for a brief, agonizing moment, a flicker of recognition, a flash of the past. And then, without a word, he bolted, running into the shadows, fleeing as though Michael's gaze was a trap. David Thompson, Michael's best friend, the one who had taught him how to fake left and drive right, the one who had believed in him before anyone else did, before the world knew his name, the one with the infectious laugh, the relentless energy, the dreams as big as the sky. But that was before. Before life had dealt David a cruel hand, one that would take him to the streets, one that would strip away everything, his talent, his spirit, his hope. And now Michael was left standing on the corner, struggling to reconcile the person he remembered with the stranger who had just run away. Something deep inside Michael stirred, an ache, a fear, a recognition that this moment, this encounter, would change everything. He threw open the door of his car, his shoes slapping against the pavement as he chased after his old friend, his heart pounding, his mind racing. "David, stop, please, just let me help." But the man in front of him kept running, his steps growing more desperate. Michael's voice cracked as he called out to him, a mixture of anger and sadness welling up inside him. "David, stop. We were supposed to be something. We were supposed to do this together. What happened to you?" But David didn't stop. Not then, not yet. A reunion after years apart. Michael's footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he followed David into the dark alley behind Joey's Pizza. The once vibrant figure he had known, full of life and laughter, was now reduced to a shadow of himself, his body thin, his movements slow and uncoordinated, his eyes hollow and distant. There was a scent around him, not just of decay but of something deeper, something that Michael couldn't quite put his finger on. It was the smell of broken dreams, of pain that had been buried for far too long, of a life that had slipped through David's fingers like sand. For a moment Michael stood there, his heart a weight in his chest. The distance between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. The easy camaraderie they once shared, the effortless bond of friendship forged through years of basketball games and shared hopes, seemed so far removed from the man standing before him, and yet there was no mistaking it. This was David. His face might have aged, his body might have withered, but the eyes, those were still the eyes of the boy who had once shared a chocolate milkshake with him after every game, the boy who had been his first true teammate, the boy who had always believed in him, even when Michael had no reason to believe in himself. "David?" Michael said again, softer this time, his voice trembling. He took a step forward, but David flinched, as if Michael's presence was a threat. He could see it in David's eyes, fear, pain, a world of hurt that Michael couldn't begin to understand. He was no longer just the boy who had taught Michael how to fake left and drive right. He was someone else entirely, someone lost to the streets, lost to whatever darkness had swallowed him whole. "Please," Michael called out, desperation creeping into his voice. "Stop running! Just let me help!" David's gaze darted around frantically, his body tense as if ready to flee again. The old, carefree joy that had once defined him had vanished, replaced by a man who was constantly looking over his shoulder, unsure of who to trust, and afraid of the kindness Michael was offering. His shoulders were hunched, his arms wrapped tightly around himself as if trying to protect something fragile inside. Something that Michael feared might be long gone. The memory of their last conversation before David disappeared echoed in Michael's mind. They had been kids back then, sitting on the curb after a long day of practice, dreaming of making it to the NBA together. They had sworn to each other, on a piece of notebook paper, that nothing, no matter what happened, would break their bond. They had promised to go all the way, to make their names known in every arena, in every highlight reel. Michael had believed it, had trusted that they would always be there for each other, that their friendship would carry them through. But somewhere along the way, David had vanished, slipping through Michael's grasp as life took its cruel turns. "David, what happened to you?" Michael asked, his voice cracking. "We were supposed to be more than this. We were supposed to—" "Don't you dare say it," David interrupted sharply, his voice raw, laced with bitterness. He took a step back, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and something deeper, regret, shame, guilt. "Don't you dare remind me of what we were never going to be. You've got your dreams, Michael. You've got everything you wanted, but me? I didn't get a choice. I didn't get a chance. Life doesn't care about your promises, MJ. It just takes, and it never gives back." Michael stood there, the weight of David's words sinking into him like a cold wave. For a moment he felt lost, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to fix this. But he knew deep down that the only way to start was to offer the one thing he knew could heal, or at least begin the process of healing: compassion. "I'm here, Dee," Michael said softly, his eyes locked on his childhood friends. "I'm not going anywhere. Let me help you." David hesitated, the walls around him thickening with every passing second. Michael could see it. The struggle, the internal battle between wanting to reach out and wanting to stay hidden. But as Michael took another step forward, he saw it in David's eyes. The faintest flicker of the person he used to be, buried beneath years of pain and regret. "I can't promise you anything," David whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city around them. "But I'll take one meal. Just one." Michael nodded, his heart aching with the weight of the moment. He didn't know where this journey would lead, didn't know if he could fix what had been broken, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't leave his friend behind again. The past that once was. As they walked side by side towards Wilson's diner, Michael couldn't help but glance at his childhood friend from time to time, searching for any glimpse of the David he once knew. But the more he looked, the more he realized how much had changed. The boy he had once called his best friend was now a shadow of the past. A broken reflection of the person who had once been full of life, confidence, and raw talent. David's every step seemed heavy, burdened by more than just the physical weight of his body. There was an emotional weight, a crushing burden that Michael could sense, even without words. Michael's thoughts drifted back to the days when life had seemed so simple, when their biggest concern had been perfecting their basketball moves. Those were the days when the world felt like it was theirs for the taking, when they had dreams as big as the sky and a belief that nothing could stop them. David had been the one who had taught Michael the trick that would later become his signature move: the fake left, drive right. Michael could still remember the sweat dripping from his brow, the exhaustion in his limbs, but he never felt more alive than when they were on that old rusty court, the sound of their sneakers squeaking against the pavement, the echo of the ball bouncing against the asphalt. "We were going to take over the NBA together, remember?" Michael murmured, his voice thick with nostalgia. David didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the ground ahead, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket. The streetlights flickered above them, casting long, wavering shadows on the pavement. They passed the familiar spots, places that had once been filled with laughter and hope. The old court, with its cracked pavement and rusted rim, still stood in the distance, a silent witness to the dreams they had once shared. Michael had always admired David's effortless grace on the court. David had been the better player between them, the one who had believed in Michael even when no one else had. Michael had been the one with the natural athleticism, the one with the hunger to succeed, but David had been the one with a heart, the one who knew the game inside and out. Together, they had formed a partnership that seemed unbreakable, a duo that could conquer any challenge thrown their way. But now, as they walked through their old neighborhood, Michael couldn't help but feel the sting of loss. How had they gotten so far apart? How had their dreams, so carefully nurtured, slipped through their fingers? "I remember the first time you taught me that move," Michael said, his voice distant, like he was talking to himself. "You always said it was about timing, about misdirecting the defense just enough to get past them. You were the one who made me believe in myself, Dee. You were the one who always knew I had it in me." David's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was a smile tinged with sadness, almost as if he were remembering something painful. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I remember that too." They had been just kids back then, full of hope and ambition. Michael still remembered the endless hours they had spent practicing, refining their skills. They had always pushed each other to be better, always challenged each other to do more, to reach higher. But somewhere along the way, the game had stopped being fun for David. Somewhere, in the quiet spaces between their practices, David had begun to retreat from the world, his once unshakable confidence eroded by the weight of things Michael couldn't understand. Michael watched as David avoided looking at him, his eyes darting from side to side, scanning the street as though he were looking for an escape. The carefree spirit of their youth seemed so distant now, replaced by a man who was constantly on guard, always searching for a way out, always hiding behind walls he had built to protect himself from the world, and, perhaps, from Michael himself. "You were always the one who believed in me, Michael," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were the one who pushed me to keep going, even when I didn't believe in myself. But now, I'm not sure I know how to be that person anymore." Michael's chest tightened at the words. He wanted to reach out, to tell David that he didn't have to be that person anymore, that he didn't have to carry all the weight of the past on his shoulders. But he knew it wasn't that simple. Life had a way of tearing people apart, of making them question everything they once held dear. Michael had learned that the hard way, through injuries, through failures, through the countless challenges that had tested his resolve, but he had always had something to cling to: his love for the game, his belief in himself, and the people who had supported him along the way. David, on the other hand, had lost everything: his family, his dreams, his self-worth. And now, as he sat in that diner, his hands trembling as he reached for the menu, Michael realized just how much of a stranger David had become. The memories they shared were bittersweet now, like the faded ink on a notebook page that had been handled too many times. The promise they had made to each other, the pact they had written on that piece of notebook paper. Those dreams had been shattered, crumbled beneath the weight of tragedy, addiction, and time. But even as David struggled to hold on to the remnants of his past, Michael knew that there was still a part of him buried deep inside, a part that still remembered what it was like to believe. "You know," Michael said, trying to ease the tension, "when we were kids, we used to talk about how we'd change the game. Jordan and Thompson, unstoppable, the greatest duo the NBA's ever seen." David's gaze softened for a moment, the faintest trace of a smile curling on his lips. "Yeah," he said, his voice almost wistful, "but not everyone gets their dreams, MJ. Some of us, we fall. We just fall." The weight of those words hung in the air between them, a reminder of the lives they had lived, the paths they had taken, and the dreams that had slipped through their fingers. David's struggles and secrets. The neon lights of Wilson's diner flickered as they stepped inside, casting a cold, artificial glow over the room. Michael held the door open and David hesitated, his shoulders tense, as if every movement was calculated, a response to some unseen threat. His once vibrant eyes darted around the diner, scanning the faces of the few late-night patrons. They were staring, not at him, but at Michael. The whispers began almost immediately, the recognition of the basketball legend carrying through the air. A whisper of excitement, a murmur of awe. But David didn't share in the admiration. His body language was a stark contrast to the relaxed confidence Michael had come to know. David was tense, on edge, as if he were just waiting for the world to turn on him. They slid into a booth, the same one they used to claim as kids after a long day of practice. It was a place that had once been filled with laughter, shared chocolate shakes, and dreams of the future. Now it was just a quiet space, heavy with the unspoken weight of years that had passed, of lives that had changed. David's eyes remained downcast, his hands trembling as he reached for the menu. The tremor wasn't from the cold, but from something deeper. Something Michael couldn't yet name, but could feel in the air between them. Michael sat across from him, watching as David's fingers nervously traced the edges of the laminated menu. His old friend had always been sure of himself, confident and poised, but now there was a vulnerability in David that Michael had never seen before. An absence of the person he used to know. It wasn't just his disheveled appearance that threw Michael off. It was the way David seemed to shrink into himself, as if he were trying to hide from the world, from the very memories they shared. "What happened to you, Dee?" Michael asked, his voice quiet, laced with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "We were going to make it, remember? Together. We were supposed to be NBA legends. What happened to the dream?" David didn't immediately answer. Instead, he stared at the menu, his face a mask of indifference. Michael could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between the man who had once been his best friend and the man who now sat before him, a broken shell of his former self. The silence between them was thick, the weight of years of unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air. David took a deep breath, as if steeling himself before he spoke. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, rough and strained. "It's not as simple as that, Michael. You think you know me, you think you know what happened, but you don't." Michael felt a pang of frustration. "David, please. I don't care what happened. I just want to know. I want to understand. You were my best friend. You taught me everything I know." David's lips twitched, a bitter smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I taught you how to play, yeah," he said, "but I didn't teach you how to survive. That's a whole different ballgame." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time Michael noticed the deep lines on David's face, the weariness that had taken root in his eyes. "I lost everything, Mike. I lost it all. And I kept losing. Every step of the way I just kept falling, and I didn't know how to get back up." Michael's heart tightened. He had heard of people struggling with addiction, with loss, with trauma, but to see it in someone so close to him, someone who had once been the best part of his childhood, was something he had never truly understood. He wanted to reach out, to hold David, to offer comfort, but he knew that David wasn't the same person anymore. Something had broken him, something so deep, so painful that it seemed beyond repair. "My parents," David continued, his voice hollow, "they died when I was 19, car crash, just like that. Gone. I thought maybe I could keep going, keep playing, but the world doesn't stop for you. The world doesn't care how many dreams you have, and I couldn't keep it together after that." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He felt his chest tighten, a sense of guilt creeping up on him. He had no idea. He had no idea that David had gone through something so devastating, something that had shattered his world. It was like the rug had been pulled out from under him, and David had fallen into a chasm that Michael couldn't reach. "I didn't know, Michael," Michael said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I never understood what you went through." David's eyes hardened, a mixture of bitterness and pain flashing across his face. "How could you? You had everything. You made it. You went to college, you went pro, you had a family, a career, and I just kept falling, Michael. I kept sinking deeper. And it wasn't just the loss, it was everything that came after. The drugs, the pain, the nights I spent on the streets. I didn't have anyone to pick me up. No one." Michael's heart ached as David's words settled in the air between them, heavy with the weight of years of silent suffering. He had always known that David's life had taken a different path, but hearing it all laid bare, hearing the depth of David's struggle, was something he couldn't have prepared for. David shifted in his seat, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. "I've done things, Michael," he whispered, almost as if speaking to himself. "Things that I can't undo. And I can't ask for forgiveness, not for the things I've done, not for the things I've become. Michael reached across the table, his hand hovering just above David's, but David pulled back, a flinch passing over his face. The rejection stung, but Michael understood. David wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to confront the full weight of his past. Not yet. "David, I'm here," Michael said, his voice firm but gentle. "I don't care about your past. I don't care about what you've done. I care about you. You're my friend, and I'm not going to leave you behind again." David's eyes filled with unshed tears, and for a brief moment Michael saw the faintest flicker of the man he once knew. His best friend, his brother, the one who had always had his back, no matter what. But that spark was buried deep, hidden behind walls too high for Michael to climb. Michael's offered to help. The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the clink of cutlery on plates. The world outside felt like it was miles away as Michael and David sat together, their meal untouched between them. Michael watched David, his childhood friend, the person he once shared every dream with, now lost in a world of his own pain and struggle. The man across from him was a stranger in many ways, yet he was still the same person Michael had laughed with, played basketball with, and dreamed of a future alongside. Michael wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, that could help bridge the gap between them, but he knew the words were never enough. David's wounds ran too deep, and no amount of kindness or sympathy could undo the years of suffering. As David absent-mindedly pushed his spoon around in his soup, Michael felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He had the world at his fingertips. He had wealth, fame, and a life most people could only dream of. Yet here he was, sitting across from the one person who had believed in him when no one else did, and he couldn't fix what had broken him. Michael's heart ached at the thought. He had always been the one to lead, the one to inspire. But now he was faced with something he couldn't control. David had lost himself, and no matter how much Michael wanted to help, he knew that David had to be willing to accept it. "I don't know what to say, Dee," Michael said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was raw, his emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." David's eyes flicked up to meet Michael's, and for the briefest of moments, Michael saw the flicker of the friend he had once known. Vulnerable, yet still alive with the spark of their shared memories. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a guardedness that Michael had never seen before. It was like David had built an impenetrable wall around himself, one that no amount of love or concern could break through. "I don't need your pity, Michael," David replied, his voice sharp, but there was a tremor in it, a tremor that betrayed the walls he had so carefully constructed. "You think you can fix me? You think you can just swoop in and make everything better? I've been on my own for too long. I've learned how to survive, how to keep going, even when there's no one left." The words cut deeper than Michael expected. He had always prided himself on being someone who could lift others up, who could help people find their way. But here was David, the one person who had always believed in him, rejecting him, pushing him away, with the very words that had always been a source of strength for Michael. "I'm not trying to fix you, Dee," Michael said, his voice steady now, though his heart ached with the weight of it. "I'm trying to help you. There's a difference. I don't expect you to be okay right away. Hell, I don't even know what you've been through. But I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone, not anymore." David's lips trembled slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He stared at his soup, the steam rising from the bowl, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. There was anger there, anger at himself, at the world, but there was also a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe? Or the remnants of hope that had been buried so deep inside him that he wasn't sure how to access it anymore. "You don't know what it's like," David said, his voice low, barely audible. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to have nothing left. You think just because you made it, I can too? You think this is just a bump in the road, a detour I can get past? It's not that simple." Michael sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He understood that David's pain went deeper than he could comprehend. The loss of his parents, the battles with addiction, the sense of isolation that had become his constant companion. It was all too much for one person to bear. Michael had faced his own demons, sure, but this was different. This wasn't just about basketball or fame or success. This was about survival. This was about a broken heart, a shattered spirit that had been forced to pick up the pieces in a world that didn't care. "I don't know what it's like, Deed," Michael said quietly. "I can't pretend to understand what you've been through. But I do know one thing. You don't have to keep going like this. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm not going to let you fade away, not like this." David finally looked up, his eyes wet with unshed tears. For a moment, Michael thought he saw a flicker of the old David, the one who had laughed at their inside jokes, the one who had dreamed alongside him. But it was gone just as quickly as it came, leaving behind the shell of the man who had been lost to the world for so long. "I don't know how to trust you anymore, Michael," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to trust anyone." "I understand," Michael replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Trust takes time, Dee. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'll be here for as long as it takes." David's eyes softened, and for the briefest of moments Michael thought he saw the faintest trace of relief in them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Michael hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, David was ready to begin the long journey back. The meal sat untouched between them, the chocolate shake waiting to be shared like so many other times before. Michael had made a promise, to himself and to David. He wasn't going to give up on his friend. Not now, not ever. The unraveling of truths. The night air had turned colder as the rain began to fall, its rhythm steady against the pavement. The weight of the silence between them was suffocating, and for the first time in a long while, Michael didn't know what to say. David had remained silent ever since their meal, his face a blank mask, his eyes far away, as if the world around them had ceased to exist. They had left the diner with no more than a few strained words, and now, as they stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, Michael could feel the years of unspoken pain between them, like a chasm that was impossible to cross. The air around them was thick with unasked questions, heavy with all the things they had never said. Michael knew that David was carrying something that weighed more than the years of silence, more than the guilt that had settled into his bones. He had known this for some time, but now, as they stood in the dark, Michael could sense that the truth was finally about to surface. David had been running from something for years. Michael could see it in the way he refused to make eye contact, in the way his hands fidgeted with the seams of his jacket as if trying to keep the past at bay. Michael had asked him before, but David had always dodged the question, always evaded the truth. But now, in the heavy quiet of the night, Michael felt the air shift. He could no longer ignore the feeling that something was about to break. "David," Michael said softly, his voice breaking through the silence, "whatever it is, whatever you've been carrying, you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here, man. You've got me." David stopped walking and turned to face Michael, his expression tight with something that Michael couldn't name. His face was pale under the streetlight, his eyes darkened with years of secrets he had never shared. Michael could feel the tension in the air, the way David's body seemed to stiffen as if preparing for something. "I know you're trying to help, Michael," David said, his voice low and hoarse. "But you don't know what this is. You don't know what I—" The words hung in the air between them, more powerful than any of the years they had spent apart, more loaded than any of the basketball games or childhood memories that once defined them. Michael swallowed hard, his heart racing. He had expected David to admit to something, perhaps the years of pain, perhaps the addiction, but nothing could have prepared him for the rawness in David's voice. This was something deeper, something far darker. "What are you talking about, Dee?" Michael asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. "What have you done?" David's eyes flitted to the ground, his gaze heavy with the burden of what he had been hiding. For a moment he looked like the David Michael remembered, vulnerable, conflicted, but then the walls came back up, the walls he had spent years building to protect himself from the world. "I hurt someone, Michael," David said, his voice so quiet that it was almost drowned out by the sound of the rain. "Someone I loved, someone who trusted me, and I can never undo it. I can't go back." Michael's heart tightened in his chest. The weight of David's words hit him harder than he expected. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what David was saying. Hurt someone? Who? What had happened? Michael opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? What could he do? "David, please," Michael said, his voice soft but urgent. "Tell me what happened. Who did you hurt? What did you do?" David took a long, shuddering breath, his hand clutching the fabric of his jacket as if he were trying to hold himself together. "I hurt my family, Michael," he said, his voice trembling. "I pushed them away. I did things I'm not proud of, and no matter how hard I tried to make it right, it was too late. I betrayed them. I broke their trust." Michael's breath caught in his throat. He had known that David's past was filled with pain, but this was different. This wasn't just the loss of a friend, the loss of a dream. This was something deeper, something that cut to the very core of what it meant to be human. David's eyes welled with unshed tears, his expression a mix of guilt, regret, and self-loathing. "I didn't just lose my parents, Michael. I destroyed everything that mattered to me, and now I can't fix it. I can't take back the things I did. I've been running from that truth for so long, trying to bury it, trying to forget. But it's always there, in the back of my mind, eating me alive." Michael felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. He had always seen David as strong, unshakable, even in the face of adversity. But now he saw the cracks in his friend, the fragility beneath the tough exterior. David was broken in ways that Michael hadn't understood before. The realization hit Michael hard. His friend, the one who had once been his rock, had been carrying this unbearable weight alone for years, and Michael had never known. "I don't know what to say, Dee," Michael whispered, his voice filled with the pain of a friendship that had been shattered by time and tragedy. I don't know how to help you, but I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." David shook his head, his eyes dark with the burden of his confession. "You can't help me, Michael," he said, his voice barely audible. "This is something I have to live with. It's my punishment. It's my cross to bear." Michael felt a deep pang of sorrow for his friend. He knew that David had been through more than anyone should ever have to endure, but he also knew that David wasn't the same person he had been. The person who had been his teammate, his confidant, had been lost somewhere in the past. And now, in the face of this revelation, Michael was left to confront the hardest question of all. Could he offer David the forgiveness he so desperately needed? Could he extend mercy in the face of such a profound betrayal? As the rain continued to fall, Michael stood there in silence, his mind reeling with the weight of the truth. The man standing before him was not the same man he had once known, and yet, deep down, Michael could still see the friend he had loved, the one who had shared in his hopes and dreams. The path forward was uncertain, filled with darkness and doubt, but one thing was clear: Michael would not turn his back on him, not now, not ever. As Michael stood in the dimly lit hallway, staring at the door where David had just disappeared, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The journey to healing, to redemption, was far from over, but Michael was determined to stay by his side, no matter the cost. He realized now that true friendship wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, even when the path ahead was unclear. In that moment he knew what mattered most: the mercy they could offer each other, and the understanding that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but learning from it. "Please," Michael whispered to himself, "don't leave, Dee, not like this." And as the night stretched on, he made a silent vow to never give up on his friend. If you've ever struggled with loss, guilt, or the pain of watching someone you love drift away, remember that mercy and forgiveness can heal what seems broken. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were Michael? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of friendship, loyalty, and redemption.